Welcome to the beautiful and historic Wyeth-Tootle Mansion. We are so glad you're here. This 43-room Italianate-style mansion with Gothic influences was commissioned to be built by Mr. William Wyeth and his wife Eliza. The couple hired famed architect Edmund Eckel to design the home to resemble the castles along the Rhine River they had seen in Germany. Edmund Eckel's influence can be seen throughout St. Joseph in many of the homes and buildings that still remain today. William and Eliza Wyeth moved to St. Joseph in 1859, and William developed a small wholesale retail business that soon grew into the prosperous Wyeth Hardware and Manufacturing Company. Eventually, William also opened the Wyeth Saddle Factory. You see, at that time, St. Joseph was the jumping-off point for the California gold rush. And Mr. Wyeth saw that if he sold goods to all of those people going to California to hunt for gold, he could make a pretty penny himself. The mansion was completed in the summer of 1879 for the sum of just $65,000. Now that may not seem like much money, but in today's standards, that's about $1.6 million. When the family moved in, they enjoyed panoramic views of downtown St. Joseph and the river, and it is said that Mr. Wyeth could see his businesses from the top of the tower. But they only lived in the home for about 8 years. While the Wyeths lived at the mansion, there were many lavish parties and balls, mainly hosted by their daughter, Miss Maud Wyeth. Maud, always the debutante, was the highlight of the social pages of her day. One of her more famous parties was the Phantom Ball. Guests arrived full in costume and masks, kind of what we would call a masquerade ball today. They had a huge party in the third-floor ballroom, and all of their masks were removed at midnight. However, when the masks came off, Maud found out she didn't know half the people in her house. Needless to say, Maud never had another Phantom Ball. That didn't stop Maud from having parties or sitting on greeting committees for visiting political figures, sometimes even a president. In September of 1879, President Rutherford B. Hayes visited St. Joseph. Maud and her mother Eliza both sat on his greeting committee. President Hayes gave a riveting speech at the Tootle Theater about the end of the Civil War, the abolishment of slavery, and moving forward together as a nation. After his speech, he visited the newly constructed Wyeth Mansion for a little bite of lunch before moving on to his next stop. In June of 1880, Mr. Wyeth was pitted politically against a man by the name of Mr. Milton Tootle. They were both denounced as forerunners for the House of Representatives here in the city of St. Joseph. Wyeth, always the Republican, and Mr. Tootle, quickly becoming the richest Democrat in the state, both would make great candidates to represent the area. Honestly, the people in the area didn't care which one of them won, as long as one of them did. Unfortunately, neither one won the election. That brings us to the Tootle part of Wyeth-Tootle Mansion and the family who lived here for decades. In the spring of 1887, William Wyeth was approached by a young woman by the name of Catherine Tootle. Catherine was the recent widow of Mr. Milton Tootle. Milton had made his way to St. Joseph and opened many different businesses. He had ventures in banking, dry goods, wholesale, textiles, you name it, and Milton Tootle probably had a business for it. He had passed away quite suddenly in their home at 5th and Farron Street, and Miss Catherine Tootle had decided she didn't want to raise her young family where her husband had died. So she approached William Wyeth to see if he'd be willing to sell the castle on the hill. Catherine purchased the home for $100,000 cash. After purchasing the home, Catherine decided it really wasn't to her liking, and so she hired the New York firm of Portier and Stymus to come in and redecorate the interior. The main hall featured a walnut paneled ceiling and an elaborately carved staircase that you can still see today. The parquet floors, in keeping with the style of the time, were almost entirely covered with area rugs and furniture. 2 stained glass windows were added on the stairway landings. One resembled a Renaissance-style painting, and the other is of beautifully cut stained glass in a floral pattern. The ceilings were hand-painted on canvas by a European artist. The rooms on the first floor were the French reception room of black and gold woodwork, the Louis XVI sitting room with angels painted on the ceiling, the library, the formal dining room, and the Moorish room with its Middle Eastern decor. The early American family dining room was added to the back of the house, and at the rear of the first floor was added the servants' dining and food preparation room. After Milton's passing, given the many businesses that he ran, it would have been proper for Catherine to find a new husband to run those businesses. However, Catherine never did remarry. Instead, she legally changed her name to Kate Milton Tootle and took over as the 49% shareholder of most of the Tootle family businesses. Running a household, businesses, and having small children, Kate needed help, and that came at the hands of servants. Many of the Tootle family servants served the family for decades. There was a few unsavory characters along the way, though. Mr. Charles Bender was probably the most prominent. Now, Catherine had hired Charles to be a stable hand, work in the carriage house, and unfortunately, when the family went to their summer home in Mackinac Island, Charles robbed them blind, took about $5,000 worth of Catherine's jewels. They reported the crime as soon as they were back, and come to find out, Charles had done this several times. He was known for finding widowed women that were wealthy and taking advantage of them. Now, he did get caught, and he did time in the Illinois State Pen. Given the social stature of the Tootle family, they were no strangers to controversy. In January of 1891, the newspapers and all of high society in Missouri was taken aback by the announcement of the engagement of Mr. Milton Tootle Jr. to a young lady by the name of Belle Golden. No one had ever heard of Belle Golden. She was in no one's social circles. Belle was the daughter of ex-deputy sheriff of Donovan County, Mr. Cage Golden. Belle had told anyone who would listen to her that she was engaged to be married to the heir of the Tootle fortune, Milton Tootle Jr. She even went as far to tell her parents that they had been wed in a small elopement ceremony and that she had left to travel the country with her new husband. In the meantime, Milton Jr. came home from college. When asked who Belle Golden was, he didn't have a clue. Belle was found later on by her father in an apartment in St. Joseph with an old man with whiskers. Milton did eventually marry. He married a young woman by the name of Lillian Duckworth. They were wed at the Plaza Hotel in New York on November 9, 1892. Upon her retirement, Kate moved to California with her sisters and left the home to Milton and his new wife. A 1932 newspaper article described Milton Tootle's home. The ceilings were painted in Europe, and the walls were lined with heavy draperies nearly an inch thick, with elaborate handwork appliques made of materials the manufacture of which has become as lost art. And charming objects of art on every side intrigue the imagination and aid in the creating of an aesthetic atmosphere. Needless to say, it was one of the most sought-after homes in the entire city. Lillian Tootle carried on the lavish tradition of high society parties in the home. Weekly, there would be a ball, a garden party, a ladies' gaming event, or one of a dozen other events that she would host. In addition to the gatherings, the Tootles hosted several different guests to the home over the next few decades. Milton Jr. and Lillian had 3 sons, Milton Tootle III, Duckworth, and William Tootle, also known as Billy, who were raised in the home. As her children grew, they came into their own hobbies and personalities. Milton Tootle III became a champion golfer and followed in his father's footsteps, being named to the board of directors for the Tootle Lacey Bank. William Tootle married Miss Mildred Peterson in 1920, and Duckworth raised more than a few eyebrows when he eloped in January of 1913, at the ripe age of 18. Amid a snowstorm, Duckworth and Miss Zanoni Travers, a niece of Herschel Bartlett. If you know anything about St. Joseph, you've heard of the Bartlett Center, Bartlett Park. All of these things were named after Herschel. They jumped in a carriage and rode to Troy, Kansas, where they were married by the Justice of a Peace. Zanoni Travers had just returned to St. Joseph that summer from Europe, where she had completed her schooling and had been announced as the debutante of the year. The elopement came as a shock not only to the families, but to the friends of the couple. Upon returning to St. Joseph, the bride and groom's parents quickly had the marriage annulled. It only lasted 3 days. However, they did announce their engagement after the annulment was finalized. Duckworth never did marry Zanoni, though. In the spring of 1914, Miss Travers returned to Europe to be announced in the courts of Europe as a debutante. She never returned to St. Joseph after that, except to visit her family. Duckworth eventually married Miss Audra Bierman in November of 1925, and again, he eloped. On November 29, 1917, Miss Kate Tootle passed away in California. Her body was brought back to the mansion where she laid in wake until her funeral, which was held at the mansion on December 3, 1917. The beautiful bride of Milton Tootle Jr., Miss Lillian Duckworth, passed away in the home on October 21, 1938, at the age of 66, after a prolonged illness. Her funeral and wake both held in the home, and she laid in rest alongside her mother and brother in the Tootle family vault at Mount Morris Cemetery. The loss of Lillian left a hole not only in her family's hearts, but in the community. Lillian was a constant supporter of charity and had instituted the Needlework Guild, a group of her friends that would sew and make clothing for underprivileged infants and children. The Guild contributed more than 1,000 articles of clothing to the Social Welfare Board in 1 year alone. Milton Tootle Jr. continued to live at the home until his passing on December 26, 1946. He had suffered a heart attack at the age of 74. By that time, the home had fallen under ill repair. Milton Tootle Jr. had grown older and was unable to keep up with the home. The stock market crash had also happened, and many of the lavish mansions on Museum Hill had come under disrepair. Unfortunately, when Milton Jr. passed away, none of his sons wanted the house, so it did go up for sale. Upon the dismantling of the estate, the St. Joseph Gazette wrote that the closing of the family mansion marks the end of an epoch of more spacious times and more formal entertaining. While they were cleaning out the library cupboards, they did find a journal of Miss Kate Tootle's. And it had a quote that we like to think of when we think of Kate here at the mansion. "The gentle, well-born, and bred woman must have the gracious, forgiving spirit. It is nobler to charm the hostility out of your enemies than to make them feel your power." And it is the perfect quote for the spirit and legacy of the Tootle family. In 1948, a gentleman by the name of William Getz, owner of Getz Brewing Company and board president of the St. Joseph Museums, donated money to purchase the mansion. The mansion was then donated to the city as the home of the St. Joseph Museums. A complete renovation was done to the interior of the home to make it into a children's natural history museum, which was the original focus of the museum. As you explore the upper floors, you will notice different exhibits throughout the second and third floors. On the second floor, you can enjoy the work of the architecture of E.J. Eckel, designer of the home and of many here in St. Joseph. You will see an exhibit on intersections of time and buildings, and it looks into what happens with architecture when it's not taken care of. Also into some of those homes that have been restored here in town. You'll see the history of the St. Joseph Museums, how it has grown and expanded over the last almost 100 years. On the third floor, you'll get back to the roots of the St. Joseph Museums as a natural history museum with the exhibit Confluence about the Great Flood of 1993. We hope you enjoy your exploration of the Wyeth-Tootle Mansion. Before you leave, make sure that you step outside and check out the extensive gardens. Also, ask our staff about hosting your next special event here, and check out our wonderful gift shop.